By the time pickup got busy at Second Bell Learning Room, Tanisha Carter was handling 5 jobs at once. She had the sign-out clipboard open, Miles's inhaler pouch on the desk, snack cups lined up, and 2 parents texting about late buses at the same time. Latrice was helping one child who needed a quick bathroom run, and Tanisha was checking staff hours with one hand while she watched the door with the other. Valerie's medication alarm was set to go off in another 20 minutes, and Tanisha knew she had to check on her too. Nothing about her face said rushed though. She stayed calm, asked the right questions, checked the right names, and kept the room moving. A child got released to the right adult. Another got a cracker and a sip of water. Miles patted his inhaler pouch like he was making sure it was still there. Tanisha had just enough time to think she might get through the afternoon when her phone lit up again. The new message was from Meredith Pike. Tanisha opened it while still standing near the sign-out line. And the first thing she saw was her own center being discussed like it belonged to somebody else. Meredith had written to Patrick Sloan to advise on Second Bell's status. Tanisha was copied only for awareness. She stared at that for a second too long while a child tugged at her sleeve and asked where his hoodie was. Around her, the pickup room kept moving. Parents were texting. Kids were calling out. Tanisha kept her thumb on the sign-out line so the page wouldn't shift. Patrick's name sitting in the middle of that email hit harder because it wasn't random. It was official. It meant somebody had looked straight at Second Bell and decided Patrick was the safer voice. Tanisha didn't make a scene. She just read it again, felt the heat rise behind her eyes, and went back to the child in front of her because the children still had to get home safely. Tanisha kept moving. A late pickup change came in, and she checked the approved list before she let anybody near the door. Miles needed his inhaler timing confirmed, so she opened the medication log and marked it before she did anything else. Latrice was still on the floor with the other kids, moving them through sign-outs and backpack checks, and Tanisha stayed low and steady, asking for IDs, matching names, making sure the right adult left with the right child. She had emergency crackers within reach for the little one who always got shaky when pickup ran long. People missed that when they acted like she was just helping. This was the work that kept the center safe and open the next day. She did not stop to answer the email. She did not let the insult pull her away from the room. She finished the pickup work first because the children did not get to wait while grown people misread her. Only when the line finally thinned and the last backpack disappeared out the door did she have a breath to look back at. Her phone. When Tanisha opened the rest of the message, the insult turned into something heavier. Meredith's lease warning was tied to rent timing and the subsidy reimbursement was still sitting there. Not cleared, not posted, not helping with Friday payroll. Tanisha looked from the email to the rent calendar, then to the stack of staff timesheets, then to the subsidy portal receipts she had already saved. The folded lease packet in her purse stopped feeling like backup and started feeling urgent. This was not just about somebody using the wrong name. If that money didn't move, the rent and payroll pressure would hit at the same time, and everybody connected to Second Bell would feel it. Staff checks, snack money, childcare slots, even the way she was keeping her aunt's medication schedule steady. Tanisha stopped reading the email like it was a mistake. She pulled out her own copies and started matching dates. Because the message had turned into a problem, she had to answer herself. Latrice saw it too. She leaned over the desk, tapped the timesheets with her purple pen, and asked whether Friday checks were still safe. It wasn't a dramatic question. That was what made it heavy. One aide had a car note. Another was covering diapers at home. The snack shelf was already looking thin. Tanisha felt that in her chest because this wasn't just paperwork. It was people's rent, gas, and groceries. She told Latrice to finish the pickup log and the timesheets, then keep the kids moving while she handled the message herself. Latrice didn't argue. She just looked at the email, looked back at Tanisha, and made it plain that Meredith was writing Patrick about a center he did not run. That was the second sting, right there. Not just being overlooked, but being overlooked in front of somebody who knew better. Tanisha kept her voice even. She saved the message, told Latrice to hold the desk for her, and started figuring out how to answer without giving Patrick away back in. Then Patrick answered the thread like nothing was wrong. He wrote back in that easy, polished way of his, talking about reviewing the issue and coordinating with Tanisha. Like Meredith had not just handed him the center of the conversation. He didn't correct her. He didn't say to talk to Tanisha. He just slid right into the space they opened for him. Tanisha's phone buzzed while she was zipping Miles's inhaler pouch and locking the snack cabinet for closing. That little buzz carried more than one message. It was the old hurt. The one from somebody who had watched her do the work up close and now let strangers talk as if he owned it. It was also a warning. This wasn't a one-time mistake. If Patrick would stand there and let the wrong story harden around him, then old access was no longer harmless. She saved the thread, stayed focused on the children, and made a note to herself that every shared password, contact list, and old email route had to be checked and cut back. After the last child left, the room finally got quiet enough for Tanisha to sit down and look at everything together. She saved the email thread, pulled up the lease packet, matched it against the subsidy receipt, the payroll timing, and the attendance records. And the picture got clear fast. This was not a random mix-up. It was a pattern. So she answered it that way. Her reply was short, calm, and specific. Any lease communication for Second Bell needed to come to her from now on. She was the one running Second Bell, not Patrick, and not as some side note. Her keys were still on her wrist, the copier was still humming, and Valerie's next medication reminder was blinking on her phone while she sent the note. She wasn't asking for permission. She was putting it in writing. The money was still stuck, the rent was still close. But now the paper trail had to meet the real one. The next morning, Tanisha did the numbers before she did anything else. She laid out the staff timesheets, the snack receipts, the rent reminder, Miles's inhaler form, and the parent copays, then measured all of it against the subsidy hold. That was how fast a small delay could turn into a bad week. One reimbursement hanging up, and suddenly Friday payroll looked shaky. The storefront balance was in the red. Snack money was already cut to the bone. The hours Latrice and the aides had already worked were sitting there waiting to be honored. And the children still had to be fed and picked up on time. Tanisha didn't need anybody to explain the pressure to her. She could see it plain. So she made her own triage list and started with the subsidy file. Because if that money did not move, the whole week would start coming apart before anybody else even named the problem. Megan called back with that careful office voice that sounds polite, even when it is still putting the burden back on. She said the provider needed to clarify the file. Like Tanisha had not been the one sending the attendance claims, the portal receipts, and the updates all along. Tanisha had the claim dates in front of her. She had the upload confirmation numbers. She had the attendance totals. She read them off one by one while a child-sized chair squeaked in the hallway outside her office. Like one of the children had shifted and settled again while waiting for pickup. Tanisha kept her tone flat and steady. She told Megan she was the provider contact and that the file was already complete on her end. Megan did not say yes. She kept circling the same language. Same courtesy, same delay. That was enough for Tanisha to hear what was happening. The hold was not about a missing record. It was about somebody refusing to look at the record she had already sent. Then Megan made it worse. She said there was one more authorization clarification needed before the batch could move. And if it missed the afternoon cutoff, the reimbursement might not land before Friday payroll and rent. Tanisha sat very still for a second and wrote the cutoff time on her pad beside the payroll total, the rent balance, and the snack order she had already trimmed down to the cheapest thing she could get away with. That was the part nobody on the phone seemed to hear. Every extra hour meant somebody else might not get paid on time. And every extra form meant the center kept carrying the cost. Tanisha asked Megan to send the missing item in writing and open the portal herself. Because if they wanted one more piece, she was going to make sure it was exact. She was not giving anybody room to call this confusion. It was a deadline. And it was hitting real people. At the credit union, Tanisha put her printed deposit sheets on the counter and opened the calculator app herself. Because she already knew the numbers. Travis looked at the papers and still asked whether Patrick would be joining the account discussion. He said it like that was the normal setup, like Patrick was the one who understood the business side. Tanisha stared at him a second, then gave him the deposit figures again and told him to talk to her directly. Her bus transfer was tucked behind her debit card, and she was the one standing there handling the account. Travis kept that neat, neutral tone of his and said he was only thinking from a business standpoint. Tanisha heard what that really meant. It meant Patrick's name was still floating around the room as the safer one, even with her standing there in front of him with the facts. So she asked for the requirements in writing and made him stay with the numbers instead of the assumption. Then Travis let it slip. Patrick had already emailed about helping coordinate the account questions. That hit harder than being mistaken. It meant Patrick was not just being confused with authority. He was in there before her, talking like he still had a right to the role. Tanisha watched Travis turn his screen slightly away while she held her own printed deposits in one hand and the exact payroll amount in the other. She did not raise her voice. She asked for a copy, or at least a summary, of any account-related message, and she said no changes were authorized unless they came through her in writing. That was the thing everybody kept missing. Old help was not the same as present authority. A neat folder did not make Patrick the person keeping the center alive. Tanisha was not going to let his behind-the-scenes emails turn into the story. But the time Tanisha left the credit union, her phone was lighting up with parent texts. Somebody had heard enough to worry and not enough to know the truth, which made the questions come in fast. Was Second Bell staying open this week? Would pickup still work the same? Could they count on after-school care if the lease trouble got worse? One parent needed coverage for a double shift. Another asked about a late bus pickup. Tanisha stood near a discount grocery shelf, looking at snack prices while she typed back. She kept it simple. The center was open. Pickup was still handled the same way. If anything changed, they would hear it from her first. She did not give them every ugly detail because they did not need all of it. They needed to know their children were safe and their work shifts were not about to collapse because the adults around her had gotten sloppy with her name. Tanisha split her attention the way she always had to. One eye on Valerie's pill organizer and one ear on the phone. She set a glass of water within reach, checked the next dose time, and kept answering parent notifications while Valerie sat at the table with her pill organizer and a file box nearby. Valerie looked at the old notes on the table, all those names and pickup details people forget are work, and said folks are quick to treat care like a favor until there is money on the table or property involved. She said it had always been that way with black women doing the work. Tanisha did not argue. She just checked the meds again and listened. Her aunt was tired, recovering, and still seeing the truth sharper than most people in the room. That mattered. It meant Tanisha was not imagining the disrespect. It was real, and now her own family had named it. Back at Second Bell, Latrice caught Tanisha before the room got busy again and asked the question nobody liked to say out loud. Were Friday checks safe? One aide had a car note due. Another was buying diapers at home. That turned payroll from a line item into real life in a hurry. Latrice had her purple pen in hand, the timesheets marked for split shifts, an emergency snack bin half empty beside her, and a stack of parent sign-out sheets waiting to be filed. Tanisha did not lie to her. She told her the subsidy file was still moving and that she was working on it. She told her nobody would be left guessing while she handled it. Then she asked Latrice to finish the hours and hold the desk steady. It was the same promise Tanisha kept making to herself. The people doing the work would not be left hanging if she had anything to say about it. Natalie Sloan called with that soft, careful voice that sounds like concern right up until it starts moving you out of the way. She told Tanisha she was wonderful with the kids, that everybody could see how devoted she was, and then slid right into the part she wanted. Maybe Patrick could help handle the business side. Maybe he could smooth things over with the adults. Maybe it would be better for the center's reputation if he stepped in. Tanisha was wiping a sticky table while Miles finished homework nearby, and she heard every piece of it. First the compliment, then the pressure, then the suggestion that her job was to care while somebody else decided. Tanisha kept her tone even and told Natalie that any business talk needed to come to her office. Natalie stayed warm, but Tanisha heard what was under it. She was being complimented and nudged at the same time, and the nudge was toward the door. Patrick texted a little later, sounding tired, almost gentle, like he thought sounding sorry would make the ground feel softer. He said he never meant for the lease mess and the subsidy hole to land this hard, and he could help smooth things with Meredith, Megan, and Travis because they already knew him. Tanisha read it while she was packing leftover crackers into a labeled bin and checking whether Valerie's evening medication reminder had been marked done. That timing told her plenty. He always seemed to show up right when the pressure was highest and call that help. She did not answer with anger. She told him to put whatever he meant in writing and spell out the terms. Exact terms, not feelings. Not memory. Terms. If he was really trying to help, he could explain himself without leaning on old access and old comfort. Tanisha was not about to let a man who used to move through her life like a partner start acting like a shortcut through her work. The reply came back in writing, and that was when Tanisha saw the trap without having to guess at it. Patrick was asking for temporary co-management access to email, subsidy messages, lease conversations, and the account side of things. He called it practical. He called it the cleanest way to keep Second Bell stable. But what he was really asking for was the door back in. Tanisha had the spreadsheet open beside her with staff, rent balance, subsidy claim numbers, and a reminder to pick up Miles's inhaler refill before the weekend. Seeing it all together made the demand feel even uglier. This was not repair. It was him making sure his name stayed in the middle of her work. Tanisha marked each place he wanted access, saved the proposal, and started a list of the channels that needed correcting instead of sharing. If he wanted to help, he could send records. He was not getting the keys back just because the timing was bad. Tanisha spread the papers out and started matching names and numbers. Email threads, Meredith's letters, Megan's portal records, Travis's account notes, and the old invoice permissions Patrick still had hanging around in the background. Every time she moved one stack, she found another place where his old access was still sitting there. She put colored sticky notes on the lease packet, the subsidy printouts, the account notes, the key list, and the staff schedule. Then wrote herself one plain reminder to check Valerie before bed. That was the part people never counted. Cleaning up after somebody else had been handed access they should not have kept, while still running work, family care, and bills. Latrice watched from across the room and did not try to take the wheel from her. That helped. Tanisha did not need rescue. She needed a map. So she started the correction list: provider contact, account authority, lease communication, passwords, written confirmations. Then Patrick made it official. He sent a co-management proposal copied to Meredith and framed it like the reasonable way to keep Second Bell stable. Tanisha caught the email while she was closing up, checking the snack shelf, confirming Miles's pickup, and sliding the timesheets into the same folder as the rent reminder she still had not been able to ignore. That was the part that burned. He was offering her the kind of help that only worked if she gave him back formal access. He wanted the door, the passwords, the right to speak. Tanisha saved the email because now it was evidence. She did not sign anything. She did not agree to anything. She sat there for a second and let the truth land. This wasn't help. It was him trying to claim the place. If he wanted anything, he could wait like everybody else and let her run the place she'd been running all along. Tanisha took Patrick's proposal, the lease thread, and the subsidy notes to Valerie's apartment and set them down only after she checked the next dose time. Valerie's pill organizer sat beside the blood pressure cuff, a grocery receipt, and a file box Tanisha had to pull from the closet. Valerie did not have the energy to run anything, but she still had the kind of memory that clears your head. She reminded Tanisha that Second Bell did not start with Patrick, and it would not be saved by acting like he had always been the one in charge. The work was older than him, older than his emails, older than his folders, older than the way people liked hearing him sound reasonable. Tanisha sat there with her aunt's medication schedule on one side and the lease problem on the other. And for the first time in days, the fight felt rooted in family history instead of just panic. Valerie pointed Tanisha to the old box of parent cards. And once Tanisha opened it, she saw why her aunt had kept them. The cards were rubber-banded by school year. Everyone had the real details. Child names, pick-up adults, allergies, bus notes. Little reminders about which parent worked late and which child needed a follow-up call. Some of them even had early notes in Valerie's careful hand about Tanisha taking over the daily routine. Not someday, but already. Tanisha flipped through them slowly, then started taking pictures. Because she could see right away these weren't keepsakes. They were proof. They showed that the trust around Second Bell had been built one afternoon at a time. With names, times, and routines. Long before Patrick ever touched an invoice or wrote a message like he belonged in the middle of it. Under the cards, Tanisha found the papers that actually mattered. Signed transition forms, provider updates, licensing letters, lease copies with Valerie's name and hers on them. An old envelope with a notary stamp and a yellow line across the page where somebody had marked the important part years ago. There was even a receipt from the day Tanisha had paid for copies after a pickup shift. That hit her harder than she expected, because it meant the proof had been sitting there all along. Valerie had already written down who was meant to run Second Bell. Not as a favor, not as a backup. As the person in charge. Patrick's neat folder might have looked official to people who didn't know better. But it could not outrank this. Tanisha separated the papers into a packet for the lease, the subsidy, and the account correction, then sat back and let the frustration settle in. The papers had been sitting in a drawer while other people acted confused. Tanisha refilled Valerie's water, checked the next medication alarm, and sat there looking at Patrick's proposal beside the transition papers. She still hadn't answered his latest message. Valerie told her, plain as day, that people did not honor black women's work just because the neighborhood remembered it. Tanisha felt that land. She had given Patrick too much time to let other people keep the wrong version of the story. Too much time hoping the work would speak for itself. It hadn't. It had only made room for him. Saying that out loud cost her, because it meant admitting her patience had helped the problem grow. But once she said it out loud, she couldn't pretend otherwise. She was done waiting for people to catch up. If the record was going to change, she would have to change it herself. Tanisha called Latrice in and they started pulling every current record they had. Pickup logs, staff schedules, subsidy upload receipts, medication forms, parent texts, snack receipts. It was all the ordinary stuff people liked to dismiss until they needed it to prove the place was safe. Latrice laid out her purple pen sign-out sheets beside Miles's inhaler authorization. And Tanisha spread out printed texts about the late buses and a receipt for crackers, juice, and cleaning wipes. Nothing about it was glamorous. It was just the actual life of Second Bell. Kids coming and going, parents running late, staff needing to get paid, medicine needing to be right. Tanisha looked at the whole spread and saw what it really was. One continuous record of how Second Bell really ran. Not a favor, not a hobby. The work that kept the doors open. And once it was all in one place, Patrick's polished folder looked even smaller than before. When she got back to the center, Tanisha went straight to the digital side of it. The center email, the subsidy portal contact list, the merchant account notes, the shared files, the old invoice logins. Everywhere she looked, Patrick's name, or his old recovery access, was still hanging around like it belonged there. Verification codes kept hitting her phone. The copier warmed up and then stalled. The Wi-Fi dropped once. Under the keyboard, a sticky note with an old password was still sitting there. Latrice stayed close, not hovering, just giving Tanisha room to work. Tanisha changed what she could, wrote down what needed approval, and made herself a clean access list so nothing got forgotten in the middle of the rush. It was boring work, it was exhausting work, but it mattered. One loose door was enough to keep Patrick's reach alive, and Tanisha was tired of paying for that with her money and her peace. After the online stuff, Tanisha moved to the doors and the keys. She checked the lockbox code, the key list, the closing procedure, and the pickup password rules one by one. If somebody could still get in the wrong way, or sign out the wrong child, then all the paperwork in the world would not keep Second Bell safe. She counted the keys on her wrist, tried the back door, rewrote the closing checklist, and looked up the price of replacing the lockbox, even though the snack order was already trimmed down to the cheapest. Things she could make work. Money was tight. That was exactly why the boundary had to hold. Latrice read the new staff rules and nodded. Miles's pickup safety sat behind every decision. Tanisha hated spending scarce money because somebody else had treated access like a favor. Still, she did it. She chose protection over ease. Patrick texted back saying that cutting him off would only scare Meredith and slow the subsidy fix. It made it sound like Tanisha was the one making trouble. Like protecting her own records was just anger with a folder attached. The message landed while she was labeling files for lease. Subsidy, payroll, and pickup records, and Miles's inhaler refill reminder was still blinking on her phone. That was his move. He always knew where to press when he wanted to make urgency sound like reason. Tanisha did not answer from hurt. She did not send a paragraph back. She kept it in writing, said no to co-management again, and saved his message with the rest of the record. If people wanted to call her harsh for drawing a line, they could do it later. Right now, the children still had to be safe, and the work still had to stay hers. Tanisha called Lori from the office. With Valerie's old files open beside her and the rest of the packet spread out on the desk. She did not ask for a favor. She asked for one plain statement of what Lori had actually seen on the school side: late bus dismissal calls, pickup changes, the medication note routine. Lori kept it tight. She could confirm the rainy Tuesday, the bus delay, the child with the backpack on both shoulders, and the exact time Tanisha had called before pickup was released. Lori only gave what she could document, nothing more. Tanisha let her finish and repeated the details back slowly, just to make sure they landed right. That was enough. No speech, no rescue. Just a witness saying what she knew and leaving the rest alone. When Tanisha hung up, the packet had one more piece in it. And it mattered because it came from fact, not from somebody trying to talk over her. Tanisha sent the correction packets out one by one to Meredith, Megan, and Travis. In every message, she named herself as the current operator of Second Bell. Said plainly that Patrick did not have authority to speak for the center, and asked for written responses about the lease, the subsidy, and the account contacts. She did not copy him. She did not ask him to smooth anything over. The copier jammed twice, so she scanned pages from her phone and kept moving. Snack receipts got clipped to staff hours. She labeled the lease pages and the subsidy papers. Payroll, pickup, medication, all of it had to be clear enough that nobody could pretend confusion later. It was slow work, and it was annoying. But it was also the first time the paper trail looked exactly like the life she was already running. By the time Tanisha finished the packet and folded Lori's note into it, it felt like more than paper. She locked down the access list, saved the corrected contacts, and told Latrice that nothing went through Patrick anymore. No emails, no calls, no authorization. If he wanted to forward something, he already had. Fine, that was it. Latrice nodded and kept moving the timesheets. The storefront stayed quiet for a second, except for the stack of chairs, the locked file drawer, Miles's inhaler pouch on the desk, and the subsidy timestamp glowing beside the rent reminder on Tanisha's phone. Then Megan sent another email. Attendance discrepancy. Same day. Current pickup and medication details needed. Tanisha didn't sigh. She just opened the binder again. Now they had to deal with the person who actually knew the children, the timing, and the routines. Megan's email hit like a second warning. It was tied to the held reimbursement batch, and Patrick was still on it like he could clear anything up. Tanisha read it beside the pickup binder, Miles's inhaler pouch, the rent reminder, and Latrice's purple pen schedule. The message was short, but the pressure wasn't. They wanted perfect paperwork while the day was still happening. Tanisha did not treat it like a desk problem. She treated it like a care problem, because that was what it was. If the attendance date was off, then somebody was asking about children, pickup, and medication, not just numbers. She opened the current binder, found the exact date, and started pulling the pieces together. Patrick's name on the thread did not change anything. The only thing that mattered now was whether the people asking were ready to hear the truth from the woman, actually running the afternoon. Then the school alert came through and confirmed the bus delay, and everything shifted with it. The bus was running late, which meant the arrival times shifted, the pickup window shifted, and the attendance note Megan was questioning changed too. Tanisha was already answering parent texts before the children had even settled in. One parent needed to know if a late shift was still going to work. Another wanted the new pickup time. Kids wanted snacks, not explanations. Latrice stood by the sign-in sheet with the van route list in her hand, waiting for the next name. Tanisha marked the delayed arrivals, updated the times, and kept the record straight while the room kept moving around her. People kept getting this wrong. The chaos was real, but so was the care. And now the exact thing Megan was asking about was happening in real time, right in front of them. Patrick replied to Megan with a tidy summary from his folder. The kind that sounds calm because it leaves out the parts that matter. In his version, the attendance mismatch was just an administrative mix-up. No delayed bus pattern. No current parent texts. No sign that the times on the page changed because the whole afternoon changed. Tanisha could see right away what he was doing. He was leaning on old staff hours, old pickup assumptions, and the file that had not been touched by the real day. He sounded reasonable because he was writing from a distance, not from the room where the children were moving. And she looked annoyed in that quiet way that meant somebody had just put staff pay and child safety at risk to sound. Polished. Tanisha did not fire off a sharp reply. She saved Patrick's email, marked the errors, and kept working from the binder in front of her. If his answer was going to become the official one, it had to be wrong in a way she could prove. Tanisha did not answer Patrick right away. The children were still arriving, and the part that mattered most was right in front of her. She checked IDs at the door, confirmed the pickup adults, and marked the late bus times in the binder before anybody moved a child off the list. Her finger stayed on the page with the question date while Latches handled the line and the kids kept asking about snacks. Tanisha kept her voice low and her hands steady. That was the work. Not rushing to defend herself. Not letting the record slide just because Patrick wanted it to look simple. Every minute she spent getting it right was another minute his version sat there untouched. It could sit there. The children came first, and the record had to match them, not Patrick's neat version. A little later at pickup, the problem had moved from paper to the front door. One of the adults on Patrick's old list wasn't current anymore. And Tanisha was not about to let a stale name decide who left with a child. She checked the red-tapped pickup page, called the parent, and kept the child with Latris near the homework table until the authorization was confirmed. The line could wait. That was the part people always tried to turn into attitude. The part where they call a woman strict for refusing to make a mistake somebody else would never have to answer for. Tanisha did not budge until the right parent answered and the record matched the release. Patrick's neat folder might have looked clean on a desk, but right there it looked unsafe. And once that happened, everybody in the room had to see the difference between a good-looking list and the truth in front of them. Miles needed his asthma routine checked after the long afternoon, so Tanisha pulled his inhaler pouch and the current medication log together and made sure the timing was right. Latris stayed nearby, keeping the room moving while Tamisha handled it. Patrick's materials did not have that kind of detail in them. They had a clean shape, but not the daily facts. Tanisha checked the label, matched it to the form, and wrote the time down beside the attendance binder. That was the part people outside the room never seemed to understand. Money, forms, pickup windows, medication timing. It all came down to a child who needed to breathe easy. If the record was off, the child felt it first. Miles stayed calm because Tanisha stayed calm and because her routine held when the afternoon didn't. She did not treat it like some side note to the reimbursement fight. It was the fight because it was the proof. And it was one more thing Patrick could not fake. Tanisha got on Megan's clarification call with the binder open and the phone on speaker. Patrick was already trying to summarize the business side like he was the one who could make the file make sense. Tanisha stopped him there without raising her voice. Attendance questions came to her. Pickup questions came to her. Medication questions came to her. The sign-out sheets, the parent texts, and Miles's form were all right there in front of her. And that was the whole point. Megan could hear the difference between a neat summary and a live record if she was willing to stay with it. Patrick kept talking in that calm, formal tone that made him sound useful. But Tanisha kept bringing it back to the facts. Latris had the backup copies ready, just in case. This was no longer about who sounded polished. It was about who actually knew what happened, minute by minute, in the room where the children were waiting. Patrick had no clean answer for the late sign-ins. He kept trying to smooth it over, but Tanisha cut straight through it with the binder open in front of her. She read the exact bus time, the arrival time, the parent call notes, and the sign-out entries that matched the late afternoon. Those children were not signed in late because anybody was careless. They were signed in late because the bus was late, and the record showed it. Latris had the parent texts clipped behind the sign-in page, right where Tanisha told her to look. Megan could hear the difference now between Patrick talking like he understood the file and Tanisha naming what actually happened. If she accepted his vague answer, the hold could stay right where it was. And Tanisha knew it. So she stayed calm and kept naming names, times and pages until the room had to sit with the facts instead of his version. Lori came through with a short email that did exactly what Tanisha needed and nothing extra. She confirmed the late bus times, the school office calls, and which kids were still waiting with backpacks on. She did not dress it up. She did not make it a speech. She just put the weather, the delay, and the dismissal records in writing because that was all she could honestly verify. That mattered. The hard part was that Megan still seemed to need a second voice after Tanisha had already laid out the record. Lori was not there to rescue Tanisha. She was there to back up the facts. Tanisha attached the note to the file and kept her own name on the answer. The records were stronger now, but the authority stayed where it belonged. By the time Megan saw it, the file had a second source and the same truth. Tanisha had been right about the afternoon all along. By the time Megan pulled Patrick's attachment up beside Tanisha's packet, Lori's school-side note was already clipped into the file, and the difference was hard to miss. His folder still carried stale pickup permissions and incomplete attendance notes. Tanisha's papers matched the bus delay, the parent texts, the medication log, and the current sign-out sheet. Every page lined up with a real child, a real time, and a real adult at the door. Tanisha walked Megan through it one piece at a time, naming where each document came from and when it was made. That mattered. This was not guesswork or a neat-looking folder. This was the work that kept the place open. Letriss's purple pen initials sat on the page like proof nobody could talk around. Megan had to decide whether she was going to protect the easier story or admit Patrick's file was not current. And once she saw it, she couldn't ignore it. Patrick tried to pull the room back to his side by praising Tanisha in the same breath he tried to move her aside. He said she handled the day-to-day beautifully, like that was supposed to sound generous. Then added that he could still help with the business side. Tanisha heard the insult inside it. He was happy to praise her for the work while still trying to keep the authority for himself. Her binder was open to payroll-linked attendance, and his neat folder still could not answer the current medication entries or the pickup notes. So Tanisha said it plain. Attendance, medication, pickup rules, subsidy claims, payroll, and licensing were the business side. Those were not two separate worlds. They were the same work. Latrice stayed quiet, but her face said enough. Patrick wanted credit for the labor without the burden of it, and Tanisha was done acting like that was help. Megan finally said it plain. Tanisha's current documentation answered the attendance variance, and Patrick's materials were incomplete for the provider file. That should have felt like relief. And for a second it did. Then Megan added that the reimbursement still could not post until the corrected contact and authorization packet was processed. Tanisha wrote that down beside the batch cutoff, the payroll total, and the rent amount due at the end of the week. Being right didn't help payroll until the money moved. So she asked for the remaining steps in writing before the call ended. No more relying on somebody's memory, somebody's tone, or somebody saying it would be fine. If the file was going to move, it had to move on paper. Latrice saw Tanisha keep her face steady, even with the good news mixed into the bad. Being right didn't mean the money was safe yet. Megan's acknowledgement should have helped, but Meredith turned it into more pressure almost immediately. She wrote back that the lease default and the liability concerns still needed a continuity plan. Patrick saw the opening right away. He started talking about keeping things steady, about helping with co-management, about how everybody would feel better if the business side had a familiar voice attached to it. Tanisha was in the middle of restocking the reduced snack shelf, checking the lockbox and setting staff hours beside the reimbursement note that still had not cleared. So she felt the familiar exhaustion settle back in. Prove the facts. Then prove them again. Then get told the room still needed somebody they felt safer with. She did not answer with emotion. She pulled the lease packet back toward her, matched the rent receipts and current contacts, and started shaping a reply that tied continuity to her records instead of Patrick's folder. Latrice saw the same thing. One acknowledgement was not enough. Then the room hit the question Patrick could not touch. Who was the current authorized provider contact? What was the corrected pickup procedure? How did the medication log line up with the disputed days? Patrick could only say Tanisha had those details. Megan had no choice but to turn the question toward her. Miles was quiet nearby, and the inhaler form sat right beside the lease packet as Tanisha lowered her voice. Open the attendance binder, and started naming dates, children, pickup rules, and the receipts she had uploaded. That was the difference between sounding official and being the one who actually runs the place. She asked Megan to send the corrected contact path in writing. No more going around her. No more using Patrick's name as a shortcut. In that room, Tanisha had the facts, and Patrick had to stand there and hear what that meant. Patrick caught her near the storefront door after people had started looking at him sideways. He looked worn out and said he was sorry for letting things get so messy. Then he said the fastest way to call Meredith, Megan, and Travis would be temporary co-management, just until the deadline settled down. Tanisha was locking the snack cabinet, checking Miles's inhaler pouch, and sliding the staff timesheets into her folder while he stood there with his neat binder under his arm. Like paper could make him sound trustworthy. That part hurt more than she wanted it to. He had watched her carry all of this and only reached for humility once the access started slipping. She did not give him a yes. She told him that if he had anything to ask, he needed to put it in writing with exact terms. Not feelings. Not guilt. Terms. If he wanted her to consider anything, he could start there. By the time Tanisha got back to the payroll numbers, the subsidy still had not posted. The staff timesheets were spread out in front of her. Latrus's purple pen marks on every page, the payroll total circled, the reduced snack order cut back again, and the rent balance still sitting there. The office printer blinked low toner, which was the last thing she needed. Tanisha told Latrus the truth straight out. Friday checks were not safe yet. Not because anybody had done the work wrong, but because the money was still hanging in the system. She knew what that meant for real households. Car notes, diapers, gas, groceries. Tanisha was not going to dress it up. She kept sorting the hours, kept checking the figures, and kept looking for a lawful way to bridge the gap without handing Patrick back the control he had already abused. If the credit union could move faster, she needed to know it. If not, she needed another answer. Travis told her the account side was still under review. He said the contact changes could take a little time. And from a business standpoint, a temporary joint authorization with Patrick would make coordination simpler while everything got sorted out. Tanisha was standing there with merchant deposit figures in one hand, parent copay notes in the other, and a bus transfer sitting on the counter with everything else she was juggling. That was the problem. The easy answer always seemed cleaner when the familiar man was the one everybody already trusted. Patrick knew the office. Patrick knew the tone. So the shortcut made him sound natural. Tanisha did not take it. She told Travis to send the review timeline and the exact requirements in writing. And she made him leave Patrick out of it. A faster process was not worth keeping the old story alive. Parent texts started rolling in so fast Tanisha could barely finish one reply before another came through. One mother needed to know if Second Bell could cover her hospital shift. Another asked about the late bus plan. Somebody else wanted to know if Patrick was taking over or if the center was about to close. Tanisha kept her voice steady and answered what she could. Second Bell is open, she typed. Pickup stays the same. Any official updates come from me. She did not tell them every ugly detail behind the scenes. She did not need to. She checked the snack shelf, matched the pickup list, and let Latrus handle the line while she kept the messages moving. What her parents needed was a clear answer, not a rumor. What they trusted was her word, because Tanisha had been the one there for the late buses. The missed calls, the medication notes, and the long afternoons that held everybody together. If that trust cracked, care slots and copays could start slipping before the paperwork caught up. Natalie's call came in warm, like she was trying to smooth over what everybody else had already stirred up. She said Patrick was trying to help, said Tanisha was wonderful with the children, and then reminded her that being too rigid could hurt Valerie's legacy and make the center look unstable. Tanisha was wiping glue off a table, checking Miles's homework page, and watching the clock for Valerie's medication reminder, so she heard exactly what Natalie was doing. First the praise, then the pressure. The old move of making her boundary sound like attitude. Tanisha told her the center would be protected by correcting the authority, not by sharing it for appearances. She did not raise her voice. She did not explain herself twice. She just said the person doing the work had to be the one with the authority. Then she looked back at the clock and felt how much more this fight was going to cost her family. Later, Tanisha checked on Valerie and found her looking worn out in that quiet way that made the room feel smaller. Valerie had her pill organizer open, the blood pressure cuff ready, and a bowl of soup cooling on the table. Tanisha logged the reading, warmed the soup, and set the old index card box back within Valerie's reach. Valerie looked at her and said, "Plain as day, we built Second Bell so children would be safe. Not so Patrick could sign over black women's work." Tanisha did not argue with that. She just stood there with the weight of it. Valerie's health made the whole thing feel sharper, because Tanisha could see exactly what this stress cost her aunt. But the message stayed the same. Honoring Valerie meant protecting what Valerie started, not handing it off to somebody who sounded better in a meeting. Patrick texted again before Tanisha had even finished labeling the new folders. He brought up the late supply runs, the nights they used to feel like a team, the years when he knew where every extra box of snacks and paper towels came from. Then he asked for temporary passwords and copied authority, saying he just wanted to help fix what he helped build. That part sat wrong in her chest. He was using old love to ask for access. Tanisha looked at the message, looked away, and kept working. Lease, subsidy, payroll, parent updates. She saved his text and did not answer from hurt. What he was asking for was not care. It was access. And he was asking for it in the softest language he had. After everybody left, the office got too quiet. Tanisha sat with the calculator on her phone, the rent reminder glowing beside the payroll total, a nearly empty snack bin on the floor, and bus fare tucked in her purse with everything else she kept for emergencies. Every number on the page was tied to a child, a worker, or a deadline. She could see exactly what the numbers added up to. If she let Patrick back in, some of the pressure might ease. Parents might stop panicking. Travis might move faster. Payroll might get safer. But then what? Then she would be handing the same man back into the place he had already used to speak over her. She wrote 2 lists on a legal pad, what his access might solve this week, and what it would cost next month. That was as low as she'd felt in a while. She could finally see what holding her ground might cost. Miles asking if Second Bell was closing hit Tanisha harder than the emails had. He was holding his inhaler pouch with both hands, trying to stay quiet while he asked. Latrice had the pickup list folded in her hand and admitted the staff were worried too. Tanisha looked at the snack shelf, then at both of them, and told the truth as plain as she could. They were open today. If that changed, they would hear it from her first. She kept her voice low so the kids nearby would not feel the room tipping. She would not promise what she could not control. And she would not hand over keys or passwords to somebody who could not protect the routine. Miles and Latrice did not take the decision away from her. They just made it heavier because now it was not about her pride. It was about the people who depended on her to keep the afternoon steady. When Tanisha went back to Patrick's proposal, the ugly part was finally impossible to miss. He kept calling it temporary, but the paper said he would be copied as joint authority on the lease, the subsidy file, and the account until both of them agreed to remove him. Tanisha knew what that meant. It meant he would be harder to push out later, not easier. It meant the room would keep treating him like the backup answer every time something got tight. She took her pen and circled the clauses beside the lease packet. The subsidy receipts, the staff hours, the key list, and Valerie's signed transition papers. That was the whole trick. He had wrapped control up in words that sounded calm. Tanisha was not fooled by calm anymore. She wrote it down as unacceptable and started shaping the reply that would protect Second Bell without giving him any more control. Back in the office, Tanisha turned Patrick's proposal into something she could answer on paper. She wrote that he could forward any records he still had. And that was it. No passwords, no joint authority, no say in the lease, no access to the provider file, no account control. If he wanted to be useful, he could send the documents and stay out of the rest. Then she built the packet around that answer, corrected contact list, key log, provider papers, payroll timeline, and the parent update draft. The copier hummed while she printed and clipped every page. She used the same steady handwriting she used for forms and logs, because if it had to stand up later, it needed to read like something she meant. She kept the wording plain because there was no room for soft talk. Cooperation was one thing, control was another. She was making sure nobody could pretend they were the same. When Tanisha sent the rejection, she copied everybody who needed to know the rules had changed. Patrick got the message that apology did not restore access. Meredith was told lease communication had to come through Tanisha. Megan and Travis got the same reminder about provider and account questions. She did not send it like a speech. She sent it plain and direct. By then her keys were on her wrist, Miles's inhaler form was filed. Latrice's timesheets were clipped to Payroll, and Valerie's transition papers were scanned and saved. The rent reminder was still glowing on her screen, but it no longer looked like a reason to give in. It looked like one more thing she had to handle herself. Tanisha was done acting surprised that the wrong people wanted access. She hit send and kept moving. By late morning, the whole problem had landed at one table. Meredith came by for lease certainty. Megan was on speaker about the subsidy file. Travis joined from the credit union. Patrick showed up with his neat folder. Natalie came with him, quiet and watchful. Tanisha pushed the homework table together and laid out the attendance binder. The lease packet, staff timesheets, Miles's inhaler form, the parent update draft, and a half-full snack bin, because this was still the same room where kids spent their afternoons. It was where children ate snacks, did homework, and waited for pickup. And now all those grown-up problems were sitting there too. Tanisha set the order herself. Subsidy release, lease cure, account authority, payroll, parent continuity. If Second Bell was going to stay open, they were going to talk to her directly because she was the one holding the children's safety, the staff schedule, and the storefront itself. Meredith did exactly what Tanisha expected. She looked straight at Patrick and asked him about the continuity plan. Like he was still the one in charge. Tanisha didn't raise her voice. She slid the lease packet forward, set the repair receipts on top of it, and tapped the email thread where she had been copied for awareness. Then she told Meredith that lease standing, rent timing, and any cure notice needed to come to her. Not to Patrick, to her. Meredith's polished nail stopped on the lease clause. Patrick started to answer, but Tanisha kept her eyes on Meredith until she responded. If they were talking about the storefront she kept open, they were talking to the person who handled it. Latrice caught it. Even Natalie could hear Patrick lose that first opening. And Tanisha made it clear the conversation would go through her, not around her. Patrick tried one more time to win the room. He called the co-management plan temporary, reasonable, stabilizing. He said he could smooth communication because Meredith, Megan, and Travis already knew his style. Natalie nodded like he was being helpful instead of strategic. But his neat folder mostly held invoices, insurance notes, and partial records. Tanisha's packet was thicker and it held the pickup logs, subsidy receipts, medication forms, and staff hours that actually kept Second Bell moving. Patrick kept calling it help. What he meant was control. He wanted the room to believe that sounding calm gave him a say in the work. He said it like he was offering relief. Tanisha let him talk, because every extra sentence made the shape of it clearer. He was trying to turn borrowed comfort into authority again. And this time, the papers on the table told a different story. Megan took her time with the signed transition papers, the licensing correspondence, and the provider update receipts, and Valerie's tired voice came through on speaker while Patrick sat there quiet. Valerie didn't make a speech. She just said what was true. She had trained Tanisha. She had documented it. Tanisha was the one meant to run Second Bell. Tanisha kept the notary-stamped paper beside the portal confirmations and Valerie's medication reminder. Because this was all part of the same day, the same life. Megan could keep asking for clarification if she wanted to. But the succession trail was no longer some family story floating in the background. It was on paper, signed and dated. And the old habit of looking past Tanisha did not change that. Then Tanisha started answering Megan the way she always answered hard questions. With exact facts. The attendance dates, late bus times, pickup adults, and Miles's inhaler timing were all in the binder. Right beside Latrice's purple pen sign-out sheets and the parent texts that came in when the bus ran late. Tanisha didn't rush through any of it. She named the day, the child, the time, and the correction, one after another, until it sounded like what it was. Care work documented the whole time. The reimbursement could move only if Megan accepted that this was the operating record. Not some side note. Patrick's folder sat there too, but it was losing ground with every page Tanisha turned. From there, Travis took the call, and the room shifted back to money. He asked who had authority on the account, and Patrick started talking about the invoices he used to help with. Like old help should still count as current control. Tanisha cut straight through that. She laid out the merchant deposits, the parent copay records, the payroll schedule, and the request to update the account contact. The spreadsheet on her desk showed Friday checks, staff hours, snack money, rent, and the little cushion left after everything else was paid. Travis could call it the business side if he wanted. Tanisha had been carrying the business side the whole time. She told him to put the correction in writing and remove Patrick from the account question. No joint authorization. No shared voice. Just the person who knew every deposit and every paycheck asking to be treated like the one actually keeping the money. Moving. Travis went quiet for a second with Tanisha's numbers in front of him. Then he admitted what the records already showed. Her payment trail was current. Her copay records matched. Her payroll figures lined up. Patrick's papers didn't give him any authority over the account right now. And they didn't explain the timing of the deposits either. At best, he had helped with invoices before, not with the account now. That was it. Nothing mysterious. He had finally read the right file. Tanisha kept her face steady, but that little bit of relief still hit her. Because somebody had finally stopped talking around her and looked at what she brought in the room. She told Travis she wanted the account contact updated in writing. With Patrick removed, not later. Not after another round of calls. In writing. Latris caught the shift right away. The staff money was finally moving toward the person who had been holding the system together all along. Then Meredith had to look at the lease itself instead of the old assumption that Patrick would handle it. Patrick sat across from her with his neat folder closed. And Tanisha didn't need to ask him for anything. She showed Meredith the rent payments, the repair receipts, the maintenance requests, and the cure plan tied to the subsidy release. She pointed to the photos of the leak that had already been fixed, the email about the backdoor lock, and the note she sent before a rainy pickup week when the storefront still needed to stay safe for the children. Nothing about that looked like somebody drifting in to help. It looked like the person who had been keeping the place current and safe and open while everyone else acted like it would take care of itself. Meredith could not keep talking around Tanisha on her own storefront after seeing that stack. She finally had to sit with the fact that Tanisha had been carrying the roof, the repairs and the rent. And then Meredith asked the next question. The one that brought the parents back into it. How was Tanisha going to reassure them? Once the money side was written down, Tanisha moved to the part nobody could fake, the trust the parents had in her. She didn't have to sell them on who kept the place steady. She already had that trust. She laid the update on the table with the same calm she used every afternoon. Pickup windows stayed the same. The late bus plan stayed the same. The medication reminders stayed right where they were. Her direct number stayed on the page for schedule changes. Lori's written note only backed up what she'd personally seen from the school side, the dismissal calls, the weather delay, the child waiting with a backpack on both shoulders. She didn't try to make a speech for Tanisha. She just put the facts down. And that was enough. The parents were looking to Tanisha, not Patrick when the afternoon went sideways. That trust was part of what kept Second Bell alive. And Patrick's folder was never going to create it. Patrick finally said it out loud. He said Tanisha was making this harder than it had to be. That he was only trying to help, that everybody in the room knew he could smooth things over. Tanisha looked right at him and said, "You watched me build this. You watched me handle the parents, the buses, the medication forms, and the payroll. And when people started calling around, you let them talk to you like you were the one running it. That shut the room up." His folder stayed closed. Hers stayed open to the child names, the staff hours, the payment receipts, and the key log. He was letting people believe him over the woman who did the work. Tanisha made that plain. What they had before didn't get him back into her decisions. Not now. Not after he let the lie harden. Natalie tried to lower the temperature after that. She said Patrick meant well, that everybody was tired, that nobody needed to make this worse. Tanisha didn't take the bait. She pointed to the stack of timesheets, the rent calendar, Miles's inhaler form, the parent list, and the locked key record. Then she said it plain. Staff wages had to clear. Rent had to clear. The subsidy release had to happen. The kids still needed safe pickup. The medication log still had to match Miles. And the access still had to be corrected. That was the work sitting in front of her. Not Patrick's feelings, not Natalie's tone. Tanisha didn't raise her voice. She just kept naming what was real until the room had to sit with it. If anybody wanted to protect Patrick from embarrassment, they could do that later. Right then, the center needed the facts to stay clear. Tanisha didn't argue. She put a single page in the middle of the table and let it sit there. Valerie's papers established provider authority. The subsidy file supported release. The payment history supported the account correction. The rent receipts backed the lease cure. Parent routines showed continuity. The key log set the access rules. Each stack had a sticky note on it, and each note pointed to one correction. No co-management, no more Patrick in the middle, and no more rooting around her and calling it help. Tanisha kept her voice low, but she made the terms plain. If the money was going to move, if the lease was going to clear, if the accounts were going to stay open, the records had to point to her. By the time she finished, nobody at that table could keep acting like Second Bell ran through anybody else. Megan was the first one to put it in writing. She sent the provider correction and the release steps, careful and polite, like people trying not to say they got it wrong. Travis followed with the account contact update and named Tanisha as the authorized contact. Meredith came next with the lease cure window, and this time the messages were addressed to Tanisha, not around her. Nobody in that room sounded celebratory. They sounded careful, which was enough for her. Written correction was what Tanisha had been asking for all along. She read each revised subject line as it came in and checked it against the papers in front of her. That mattered more than anybody's apology. The money, the lease, and the account were finally being routed to the woman who'd been keeping Second Bell open all along. That was when the consequence got real. Meredith removed Patrick from lease communication. Megan said flat out he was not a provider contact. Travis said he had no account authority, and that was that. Tanisha did not make a speech out of it. She just told Patrick he could forward whatever records he personally held. Once, by her deadline, and that was the end of his role in the room. His folder stayed on the table with nothing left to do there. Tanisha wrote the deadline beside the password cleanup list, the key log, and the staff contact sheet because she was not going to let apology wander back in through an old door. Patrick looked embarrassed, and Tanisha kept her focus on the center. But embarrassment was not going to keep him in her lease emails, her provider file, or her money. Natalie had to sit there and watch it happen. And Latris saw the boundary turn into policy. He was done speaking for Second Bell. Tanisha ended the meeting by turning the whole thing into a working list. Subsidy release steps, lease cure timing, account correction, parent communication, payroll sequence, access rules. She said each one out loud, like she was pinning the day down so it could not drift back into confusion. Then the first afternoon bus alert came through, and she didn't lose her focus. She tucked the corrected emails into the lease packet, clipped payroll to the subsidy note, checked Miles's inhaler pouch, and handed Latris the parent update before the kids started coming in. Nobody else could do that part. Not Patrick with that polished folder or those late apologies. The work still had to go through Tanisha, and now the emails and accounts did too. Patrick was still present, but he was outside the decisions that mattered. The roof, the pay, the medicine, the pickups, the records all ran through her now. That was how Second Bell had to work. The next morning was quieter, but not lighter. Tanisha still had to check the subsidy release status, the payroll timing, the lease cure instructions, the parent update draft, and the password cleanup before the children arrived that afternoon. Her desk was crowded with corrected emails, staff timesheets, the rent receipt folder, the snack list, Miles's inhaler pouch, bus fare, and Valerie's medication reminder blinking on her phone. It looked like her whole life spread across one desk. The difference was that the work was finally coming to her the way it should. Latris was back beside her, going over the list with that tired little look that says the worst part may have passed, but the day still has to be handled. Tanisha did not need a grand feeling. She just needed the morning to stay in her hands. And for the first time in a long time, the work in front of her finally felt like hers to direct. Tanisha sent the parent update herself, one clean message to every family on her list. Second Bell was still open. Pickup still worked the same way. The medication routine had not changed. If anybody needed the late bus number, The pickup ID reminder, the inhaler form deadline, or the snack note. It was all right there. And if a schedule changed, it came through her direct number, not Patrick, not Natalie. Not some rumor that had gotten loose and started sounding official. The replies came back fast and they were practical. Moms asked about tomorrow's pickup. A dad checked the bus time. A parent thanked her for keeping everybody straight. Latrice saw it too. The tone in the room changed once people knew where to look. They were talking to the woman they trusted, not about the man they thought might be taking over. That alone felt like a breath she had been holding for days. By the time the subsidy money posted, Tanisha did not need anybody to tell her what it meant. Travis's account confirmation had come through. The account was corrected. She printed the payroll confirmations, stapled them to Latrice's purple pen timesheets, and sent the checks through under her own authority. Latrice looked at the page twice, just to make sure it was real. It was, the staff were getting paid. The fear everybody had been carrying started to ease. Tanisha set the reduced snack receipt aside without that tight feeling in her chest, because she did not have to stretch the same way now. It wasn't a victory lap. It was payroll clearing the way it should have. But in a room like that kind of relief changes everything. It means the aides can stay. The parents can keep working. And the center can open again the next afternoon without the whole place sitting on a fault line. By afternoon, Meredith's next email came back fixed. The lease cure window was open. And this time the message was addressed to Tanisha Carter, not Patrick. Tanisha read it once, then again, and filed the confirmation beside the rent receipts. The repair photos, the note about the backdoor lock, and the lease packet she had been carrying through this whole mess. It wasn't some big dramatic victory. It was one corrected email on a screen. But that line meant the roof was still hers to protect. It meant the lease side of the fight had finally stopped pretending she was a guest in her own storefront. She slid the papers back into place, steady as ever. And for the first time in days, the place felt less like it was slipping out from under her. After that, Tanisha went after every loose end Patrick had been leaning on. She changed the recovery email. She changed the lockbox code. She checked the key list against the doors. She updated the staff contact sheet so nobody had to guess where a problem should go. Then she put Patrick's remaining records in a separate folder and gave him one deadline to turn them over. One deadline, and that was it. No open door. No old access hiding inside a favor. Latrice stayed close while she did it. Because this was the kind of thing people call petty right up until the wrong person still has a key or a login and walks back into your business. Tanisha wasn't being petty. She was being careful. She had already watched one copied email turn into a claim on her work. She was not letting an old password or a spare key do that again. By the end of it, access at second bell wasn't a memory. It was a rule. Patrick came back one more time, and this time he didn't bother trying to sound polished. He said he was sorry. Said he knew he had let people treat him like the authority because it made him feel useful. That part landed hard because it was honest. Tanisha stood near the storefront door with the children's artwork drying behind her and kept her keys looped around her wrist. She told him regret did not give him back the passwords, a say in the lease, the provider access, or any say in her decisions. He could mean what he said. He could feel bad about it. But that didn't make him safe for the work. Patrick looked down at his folder, then back at her, and there wasn't much else left to say. Tanisha didn't rush him. She didn't soften it for him. Either. What he did after that was up to him. The boundary was hers to keep. And for once, he had to leave it there. Later, Tanisha called Valerie and gave her the full update. The channels were corrected. Payroll was moving. The lease cure was confirmed. Patrick did not have access anymore. Valerie listened with her pill organizer sitting beside her and went quiet for a second before she said, plain as ever, that she had trained Tanisha for this work and Tanisha had carried it farther than anybody could have expected. She wasn't claiming the win. She was just naming what was true. Across the room, Miles signed his name slowly on the pickup sheet. Latrice restocked the snack shelf with a little more ease in her shoulders. The whole place seemed to loosen up a notch. Tanisha stood there with the phone in her hand and felt what it was like to be seen by the people who knew the work. Before the gatekeepers did. No praise was going to pay the bills by itself. This time the words matched the work. The next pickup windows started under Tanisha's rules. The corrected contacts were in place. The staff had been paid. The lease was steady. Parents were calling the right number again. Tanisha printed the pickup list, checked Miles's inhaler pouch, and clipped the parent letter to the sign-out table before the children came through the door. Outside, the second bell rang and another afternoon started. Tanisha carried her keys on her wrist and watched the kids walk in like they belonged to a place that knew their names. It wasn't Patrick's project, and it wasn't just something Valerie used to run. Second bell was hers to run now, and everybody in the room knew it. That was enough. The roof was secure, payroll was moving, and the children were safe. And whatever came next, she would be the one deciding it. This one stayed with me the way a late text does, where one small line tells you the whole disrespect. Cop it for awareness on your own work says everything. I keep thinking about Tanisha holding pickup sheets, medication logs, and staff pay in the same two hands while other people kept acting like she was just the helper. That kind of erasure is so specific, and so many people know it when they hear it. If you've ever been rooted around on work you were actually carrying, tell me in the comments. And if you know another story with that same sting, send it my way.